Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Corey Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chug.
Today we have Ted Broman with us. I've known Ted for quite a while, and I think of Ted as a serial entrepreneur, someone who everything he touches turns to gold kind of a thing. That's how I always think of Ted. Now, he may not think of himself that way, but that's how I think of him. So, Ted, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit, just to give context to the listeners, tell us a little bit about your career, and then we'll dive right into being a gentleman and your family.
I think most people probably would think of me as an entrepreneur. I never did. I thought that the entrepreneur was more like the crazy, not crazy, but the scientist that was full of ideas and the inventor and just one idea after another. And I'm like, I don't have any ideas. And I think what happened is I probably became a hired entrepreneur where people were hiring me to take their idea and their project and their business and scale it. And I would just thought I was a business guy, and just worked on processes and people systems. And along the way, I kind of probably realized that I was an entrepreneur and that it wasn't so much about the idea. You look at most books or venture capital firms or people that really study that or invest in that, I think that they'll generally invest in the team, not the idea, and that the idea can come and go. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the team and their ability to build systems and processes. And really that's what I did. And sort of over time realized that, hey, maybe I am an entrepreneur. Doesn't really matter whether I am or I do what I do. But I have probably owned or started 50 to 60 businesses. Most of them don't turn to gold. I wouldn't even say they go to lead. A lot of them die. And a lot of those are slow, painful deaths. But I've had some good exits and some good success things, and mostly just enjoyed what I do along the way and the people that I get to meet and what I get to learn. I love to learn. And so it's exciting to use business as a classroom.
I have to say, I've been recently thinking a lot about the benefit of failure. And in fact, any entrepreneur who hasn't failed isn't really probably an entrepreneur. Anyone who's been a success has failed many times. You think of Thomas Edison, you think of you, 50, 60, I had no idea, but you have at least 5 or 6 that I know of that are these huge successes. So, and I feel like people are afraid to fail in life in general. And so kind of out of left field, have you talked to your kids about failure and that's okay? I feel like I'm not doing that great of a job at that. Like my kids, if you don't get an A, then if you get a C, then I'm talking to them about, hey, you need to get A's and B's. But reality is failing often is a key to success, I would say. What are your thoughts on that?
To answer your question on my kids first, and then I'll address my thoughts on the question, is I probably haven't that much. There was a situation with my second son with his work where I kind of did. He had a job opportunity at his work to take over Oracle and Amazon for them, which is a huge channel, and he was like, yeah, but it might pigeonhole me and put me over here. And I just said, you can't worry about that. You've got to take the biggest opportunity in front of you at the time and just move forward. And so I kind of did, but I generally don't talk about failure itself other than just, it doesn't matter. I mean, one of our sayings as a family is Romans do hard things, and we try to make people stick with stuff. So if you sign up for something, you stay with it. And so we really do push grit and determination and staying power. I think that usually wins most battles in the end. I think it's the Rocky Balboa. If you just keep getting up, and no matter how much you hit me, I'm just going to take it. I think that has a lot to do in the win. On the business side, how I really talk about it is that I really say, the thing that kills businesses is they run out of cash before they have gone through their pivots. Every business has 5, 6, 7, 10 pivots, which are basically micro failure. Well, they're failures, but you hope that you can dial it in before the business dies. And that's where, Jim Collins talks about fire bullets first, then cannonballs. And I think you need to fail in a way that it's contained and you don't bring the whole ship down. But what normally does is people either go all in on a strategy and get too far into it, or they run out of money. They spend all their money on that. And you really just need to keep enough money that you can keep pivoting and pivoting and pivoting. And I think all businesses are 5 or 6 pivots away from being successful. I like how in Jim Collins' new book, he talks about how the Pixar guy said every Pixar movie, I think that's the name of his book, every Pixar movie was terrible. And the point is that every movie started out terrible. I mean, it was just terrible. And yet they pivoted, adjusted, tweaked, pivoted. And then you get Toy Story. And then you get Monsters, Inc. And so I think it's about just sticking with something and adjusting and pivoting until you find success.
Yeah. So maybe with kids, it's a never give up, but pivot. Right? Yeah. It's not a failure thing. It's a persistence thing. And that it probably isn't going to work out exactly how you have it in your mind. But if you keep going and keep pivoting, you're going to get to a place of success.
Yeah. My oldest son was really a kind of a star football player, really top recruit. And something happened that he got sort of blacklisted, became a pariah, and everything went away at once. It was like, it's interesting to watch, to go from goat to goat, the good goat to the bad goat in one moment. But he persisted, and he talked Hawaii into letting him come and try out to be a walk-on. And then we sent him over there, and everybody thought we were nuts for doing that. And he was nuts. And then it turned into a preferred walk-on. And then and then he ground through that and found a way to pay for it, do everything. And just fought and toward he ended up starting 19 games and got a full scholarship. And, stuff doesn't generally work out. Almost never works out like I thought, whether in business or in life. And you just need to get back up, and then you need to adjust. And I think part of the secret to that is questions. You just got to ask good questions and then move forward.
As you think about experiences like your son going away to Hawaii, can you think of other experiences where they've asked questions and you've kind of helped them through times where they've had to pivot?
I think the magic is in good questions. And kind of the thing I tell more on a business front, I tell my teams is the answer is always in the question. And if you're not getting the results you want, you got to ask better questions and more questions. And so I think the key is to ask good questions. And so like if it's, let's say your body isn't what you want, normally people say, why am I so fat? Or I'm such a pig, or and we either make statements and kind of label ourselves, or we ask disempowering questions. Instead, you could say, how could I have the health and vitality that I want? How can I have the body that I want to achieve? And then our mind doesn't know the difference of the subtleties. It just goes to work on that problem. So if we tell it, hey, I'm a pig, and why am I so fat? Or why am I so fat? Well, because you're a pig and you eat too much. Or, if you want to say, how can I make the best of this situation now that all of a sudden I don't have anywhere to go to school? And so, you ask a different question. If your relationship isn't where you want it to be, if your business isn't where you want it to be, you just need to ask open-ended, empowering questions. How can I have the business that I want and I've always dreamed about and succeed? How can I help people's lives and do things that make a meaningful difference in the world and make a really nice career and remuneration for myself? I think those are the type of question differences that really make a difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that. I really think there is. The way that our brains understand how we talk to them. And, I've had this conversation with my sons as they've learned how to deal with talking with their sisters and women in their life, and what's okay to say and what's not okay to say. And they say something, and then I quietly correct them privately. I said, if you wouldn't say that to yourself in the mirror, don't say it to somebody else. And at the same time, when we're talking about how we're doing as parents, how we're doing as business owners, how we're doing as employees, if you wouldn't say it to somebody else, don't say it to yourself.
Yeah.
that's really a powerful statement, especially when you're talking about self-image and self-worth, that is so powerful in the lives of especially teenagers today.
There's two things that stimulated in me. One is that I always had in our family a thing called TKN. So when something came up, and they're like, well, yeah, but Dad, and it's like, okay, is it true? Well, maybe not, but let's say it is true. Okay, it's true. Is it kind? Is that a kind thing to do? Well, yeah, maybe not. And then lastly, it's like, well, that wasn't unkind. Okay, is it necessary? Did you have to say that? And so I ran a lot of stuff that we did through that filter of true, kind, and necessary. And I actually use that at work as well. I changed the word to usually relevant on the necessary and respectful sometimes on the kind. But, there's nothing wrong with being kind at work. And the second thing that came to mind was at one of my companies, Smart Resources, we have one of our core values is Genshai. And it's an Indian word I heard about from Kevin Hall, who's an author and a speaker. And it means never treat anyone in a way that would make them feel less or small, including yourself. And it's basically see and respect the person and be kind. And that has been a really powerful thing inside the company, and including as I'm really trying to raise the bar on accountability and pushing discipline and exactness, which normally all bring harsh things, but yet I've pushed discipline, accountability, execution, follow through, all with Genshai. And so we always do everything to say, I can hold you up. I can really hold you accountable, and do it with love and do it in a way that's respectful.
That reminds me a little bit of, have you ever been a part of Rotary?
No, it was Kiwanis that I did for about 6 months. So I've not done Rotary.
Rotary has a 4-way test that you recite at the beginning of every meeting. 1 is it the truth? 2 is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and friendships? And 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Oh, that's great.
And that's kind of like your TKN. I like yours. It's shortened down and a little bit easier for kids to understand. But, if you run whatever you're doing, whatever you're saying towards your kids, or trying to help them understand this concept through that filter, it filters out the stuff that's not useful. And sometimes, I know my wife sometimes catches me and she'll kind of pull me back, be like, hey, lay off the throttle a little bit. There's a different way to approach this. Calm down, cool your head, come back and approach this in a different way after you've got a minute to think about it. So always grateful for that,
For sure. So Ted, talk to us a little bit about some of the other things that you've tried to pass on to your kids, or things that you've really wanted them to internalize in life. I love your acronym. So I'm looking for a couple other
I think
nuggets.
I'm out of acronyms.
Okay.
That's a hard question. And I had a notion, maybe it could have been 15 years ago, maybe it's 10, but as my older boys, I have 5 kids. And so I have 3 adult children now and 2 teenagers at home. So it's been really interesting to kind of live through the whole process and see them starting to come out the other side. I've just now got our first grandchild.
Oh, congratulations.
Cool.
But so anyway, 5 kids. And about 10 years ago, as my boys were the older boys were 14, 15, something, I thought, what if I died? And what would I want my boys to know? And so I wrote this thing called the Curriculum of Life. And I actually wrote it out and did, prepared. And I've been working on it for 10 years since then. It hasn't changed that much, which is kind of interesting. Another interesting little sidebar, and then I'll come back and answer what they are, is we've done a lot of estate planning and stuff over the years. And we've generally believed that giving a lot of things to your children, just carte blanche, is a disempowering and disabling thing. And our kids are a little confused by it at times, where it's like, I don't understand that. But I've gone back over the last 6 months and really been just studying, like now that they're older, it's like, what do we really want to do? And how do we do this? And I think really what I'm really looking for is stewards and passing on the stewardship. But the thing I really saw is that the key is, and it's a great book called Beating the Midas Curse that had this, but the key is to, you want to pass on your values. That's what's really valuable. And most people just pass on their valuables. They pass on the money and it's pretty much gone at most in 2 generations. And there's another book called The Entitlement Abolition. I think I said that right. That also really reinforces that principle. So they're great books, but they really just teach that your family values, your way of thinking, and even the values and the beliefs and the habits and the character things that helped you build the wealth are the things that you really need to pass on to your kids. And then potentially the money can go. I don't know that we ever intend to do that, but we don't necessarily plan to give it all to charity or give it to the government in tax. We just want to leave it in some sort of a vehicle that the children, if they prove worthy stewards, can then manage and deal with generations. But the key to that is building character and training them, and then training them on your values and your belief systems. And that's the magic. And I think, and so passing on values, not valuables. So back to the
you
questions.
might have just described the Gentleman Project in a nice little overview package.
Yeah, with a
that
little
great.
twist of like financial planning in there.
That was very insightful.
It was. I love the idea of passing on values instead of valuables, because money will come when they do the right things and for them in their own way, and something that they're passionate about. If you pass on those things that create wealth, like financial management, hard work, grit, determination, stick-to-itiveness, people skills, all the things that you can build a business on. I love that.
Yeah. So kind of now I'm very interested in what you wrote down.
The Curriculum of Life by Ted Broman.
I'll give you a couple teasers. Won't bore you with the whole thing. I think one of the key things is to be a self-directed lifelong learner. And that means also being open and curious. I think that wins most battles. And so one thing I would really push, and I do push to instill in my kids, is that curiosity and that hunger, and and I always have said, another little Tedism that I say is, don't let school get in the way of your education. And I'm a big fan of education, but I also really believe that school isn't the answer. I say you go to school to learn to think and to learn how to learn and to communicate. And that's, for me, really it. The technical skills aren't that valuable and applicable, I don't think. And again, I'm a huge proponent of education, but I just try to put it in perspective for my kids to say, you're there to explore and to learn and to try crazy ideas on, but it's about, you got to learn how to learn, and you got to learn how to think, and you got to learn how to communicate. That school is great at teaching that. And so I love the idea of being a self-directed lifelong learner, and really just then you become a student your whole life, and you don't have to have anyone else be responsible for that. You can manage that. And we've become big Audible fans, which is kind of fun. And so we all crank through, and they've gotten into my Audible library, and I have like 900 and something titles in there, and they'll go through and then my son will come and say, oh, I just read, The Eighth Habit, and what about this? And what about that? Or we'll go through them together and we'll talk about books that we read. And so now all of my older 3 children, actually my older 4 children, my youngest one, I don't think does much, but my sophomore in high school, and then my 3 adult children, my wife and I, are just pound through the audiobooks and reading books.
I can say that every interaction that I've had with you, you've mentioned books that you've read and something that you've learned from those books. So I know that you're walking the walk on this one. You're probably always reading something good. So maybe we need to publish a Ted's top 10 books list or something this week on social media.
Yeah, Yeah, I actually worked on that list the other day. I went back and I've done it several times because all my companies, I have everybody read the books. We have a core curriculum that everybody's expected to read when you come to work there, that these are the books. But then in addition to that, we do kind of a book of the month club where we buy books for everybody in the company, and then we sit and read them and then discuss them as a group. And
I have to have that list now.
Okay.
Whether you tell us during the podcast or we publish it later is great, but I'm not going to forget.
What's interesting is that I've really gone back to things that were early big impacts for me, which I would say is Jim Collins and Stephen Covey. If I had to pick a book to give to my kids and I didn't go into religious stuff, it would be The 7 Habits. But yet The 8th Habit is even a better book, I think. The Third Alternative by him is amazing. There's a book that I was so determined to hate that would also be on my list, is by his son. I thought he was doing a 7 Habits for teenagers, they did all these other little spin-off books, and then Stephen M. R. Covey wrote The Speed of Trust, and I think that's a transformational book. So I would say
I love that book. I bought
everything
that
in the
here.
Covey library, everything in the Jim Collins library. I thought his best book was Beyond Entrepreneurship that nobody knew about. He's now republished it with a bunch of updates, and he's created a map that integrates all of his previous work. And I think it's just brilliant and so that's called B 2.0 by Jim Collins. But I would say the backbone of my stuff is really Covey and Collins. And what's helpful is that gives you a common language and a common framework within the company to discuss stuff. So even if you're like, well, I hate that, then you pick something else, that's great. But it's really helpful to have that common framework. And then you start to build off of that. So we build people principles, and all my companies have a published people principles on how we deal with that. And it's all within that framework. And we have core values and core purpose. And we do that in our strategic planning, all within that framework. And so it helps, rather than even be, well, this is the right book. It's just to have the book and create the common language.
Yeah. The first two, then what? Let's talk about our hedgehog concept. All that kind of stuff, right?
Well, and really that's what has come up many times on the podcast, is creating a family culture. So what you're talking about in business and the culture that you've created in reading the same books, having the same language, the same culture framework, the same priorities, and the same goals that you're all working towards can be translated directly to the family situation, in which you can spend the time that you have with your kids. Maybe it is just one of these books that you say, hey, we like the language in this book. Let's set our family mission and our family mission statement and the things that we do as a family, what we stand for. And when you revisit it, you can use every principle that you just mentioned in a family setting, and it will do nothing but strengthen the core group of your family members moving forward as a family unit. So it's all exactly translatable from business to family, 100%.
I agree. And that's really where it matters more to do with your family. I would say, at least for me, it's been harder to implement there. Somehow there's either because you're dealing with more adults, or because we're stuck there all day because we get paid to be there, or something, or just because I not put the energy into it that I did at work. But it has been harder to implement intentional values. Now, you always have a culture, whether you state it or not, in a family or in a business. You always have values and norms, and whether you know it or talk about it or write it down or not, they exist. So we definitely have stuff that we do, but I have noticed it's harder to implement that with my family. I will say one of the most powerful things I've done with my kids, and it was an exercise I did at work on defining our core values, is I went through a core value exercise with them. And so we sat and just kind of blank canvas said, tell me what are values that matter to you? And I gave them examples, like we're nice to each other. We put away our dishes. It could be very sort of simple, or it could be grandiose, like we have integrity. And they wrote, I typed them out, and they just spit them out. And we got about 75 of them that were all stuff that we thought that resonated with us. And then I went through and don't remember if I got word strips then, or I think I printed out a page for everybody. And then I said, all right, get rid of half of them. And that was pretty easy. We chopped out and got down to, I probably made us get down to 30. And then we compared notes on what was the 30, and we built, and then we had to negotiate to get a combined list of 30. So we went from 75 that we all agreed on, then everybody cut it down to 30, and then we went down to a combined list of 30. And then I'm like, okay, that's good. You guys, oh yeah, we love those, are great. I'm like, all right, get it to 15. And it was like, oh. So then we went and did that, but it wasn't too bad. Got your list to 15, and then you had to negotiate and get everybody on the same page with, and really from a seek first to understand, not to be understood standpoint, where we would listen and talk and tell me why that matters to you. And well, this one time, and then there's stories attached to it. And then we got down and finally got to a list of 15. And then I said, all right, cut it in half again. And that one was like, it was really painful to get rid of some of those. And I think I cut it down. We ended up at 7. But it's really meaningful and powerful for them to go through that process. And when you start with a thing, and when you really identify what's the difference between, you get down to honesty and integrity. Do they both need to be there, and why? And what does it mean? What does it mean to be integrous? What does it mean to you? And you're talking to a 9-year-old, and what does that mean? And what does honesty mean? And, that was a little easier, but but those are kind of some of the things that they're both on the list when it's a bigger list, and you get down and, what does it mean? Do we want loving versus kind? And what does being kind mean? And what does loving mean? And so it's a powerful exercise.
Well, it sounds like you've been pretty purposeful to me, at least in that exercise. So that would be a fun one, I think, to do. I'm imagining my 4 kids arguing over what our family value should be. And I think it would get pretty heated, like you said.
And the 2 of them are probably kindness and respect, and they're yelling at each other and throwing stuff at each other while they are arguing why kindness and respect should be in the
well, that's a great exercise, and one I think I'm excited to do with my kids. I think that would be really fun to see what they come up with. A lot of times, I think when you said earlier, you ask the right questions. Sometimes we ask those superficial, shallow questions, how was your day? What did you do? Even if you delve one layer deeper, what was the most exciting part of your day? You always will get an answer proportionate to the deepness of the question. When you start to talk about some of those things, like what is the very most important quality that you have in your life? What do we stand for as a family? I think that you would probably learn more by just recording that conversation and listening back to it, of what's inside your kids' heads and what they think's important, what they've witnessed, the people that they've seen as examples in their lives that have displayed certain qualities, and why they think that that's important. Just listening and observing that conversation, I think, would be very educational.
Yeah, that is interesting. That triggered a thought in my head about family dialogue. And I kind of thought, I don't know that we do anything that particular there, but I realized that there is this real simple question that we ask that I think is one of the more powerful things that we've done. Because you sit down to dinner and you kind of say, how was your day? Fine. I mean, that's really what it is. We just ask 3 different questions that really seem to stimulate the dialogue when everybody goes around the table, and we do highs and lows, and then what did you learn? So I'll be like, what were your 3 best things today? What are your 3 highs? And, that really gets inside someone's head and heart. And what's your low? And we usually try to do 3 to 1, just like on any kind of feedback you give your kids, it's always 3 to 1. And I'll go back to that story, but I'll finish my last thing. The other one is, what did you learn today? And always try to say every day you got to learn something. And what did you learn? What did it mean to you? And how do you feel about that? Back to the feedback, I would watch my kids play Little League. It was painful. I mean, I could literally find 1,000 things they did wrong. And, I'm not one, I'm really quiet. I don't sit and yell at them during the games and tell them play by play, now dribble right, now go left, now shoot, now pass, block, and I just watch. But with that in mind, they'd come back and it would be like, okay, so I had to learn to really watch to find what they did well. Cause it's like, how was my game? And I mean, I literally, on the tip of my tongue, had 1,000 things he did wrong I could tell him. And yet I can't tell him any of that. I have to say, leadership is not being a critic. It's being a light. It's not being a judge. It's being a model and a mentor. And I think true leadership is helping people discover, for you to discover the greatness in them and help them discover it and believe it. And I think another book that really does a good job of that is Multipliers. I read about level 5 leaders with Jim Collins, and I'm like, that sounds great, but what is a level 5 leader? And then I read that book, and I think it does a good job of describing a level 5 leader. And I think Covey also does a great job of describing leadership, but it is really to help people see their greatness. And you see their greatness first, and then you help them see it, and then you help them rise to that occasion. And so with my kids, what had to happen is because I didn't see anything they did right. And a lot of times at work, I'm like, I don't know that this guy does anything right. And it's really easy to see all the wrong stuff. And the same thing with my spouse, it's like, well, I know there's 100 things. These things bug me and they make me mad, but what's stuff that's great about her? And I'm not that great at this, but I've had to become a private eye through my curiosity, and I'm trying to investigate people's greatness. So as a leader, it's like I'm trying to look at what your greatness is. And so with my kids, I had to say, okay, well, that one time you really ran down the court, you hustled. It was great. And then, but I got better at it. But it was really an interesting turnaround where I had to go from saying I was a really good critic. I could see everything that people did wrong. And I generally didn't tell them, luckily. But I'm learning to become more to where I see their greatness and their goodness. And sometimes you have to look a little harder and you have to dig, and then people rise to that.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth in this statement that you find what you're looking for.
Yeah, that is very true.
So I want to go back to, you wrote down these things you wanted to, pass on to your kids. I can't remember what you called it.
Curriculum of Life by Ted Broman.
So I just don't want to miss anything in that before we move on to some other content. Is there anything specific that we missed on that curriculum that you think the listeners would benefit from?
Well, I can read the list to you, but
yeah.
I'll maybe only talk about one more. I think is just to be an actor and an agent, live an intentional life. And I think that goes with goal setting, that deals with, having a vision. I think vision boards are powerful. I'm not a mystical guy or a far out there guy, but I really believe, but in disclosure, I read the book, The Secret, and then I saw the movie and I thought, I believe that's true. But I've really been looking more into quantum physics and literally, I think how to my understanding of human understanding of how the universe works, that there's something to that. And there is a whole field of unmanifested potentiality, and it literally can, if you get into quantum physics, we can make whatever we want, and we can bring the future into the present and believe it, and then we will create that. And I set a bunch of goals when I was probably 21, 22, and they were outrageous goals. They were just obscene, ridiculous goals, and they've all come true. And so goal setting is just so powerful, but it's also clear to know where you're going and why. And so to have a purpose as a person, as an individual. We said these work for the family and we said they work for business. And also I run this whole process on myself as an individual, that I have a purpose, I have a vision, I have my values, I have my mission statement, and I have a plan. I have a strategic plan on how to get there. And I think, so it's goal setting. If you just do that is, and just set goals and don't even write them down, that is a game changer. If you set the goals and write them down, now you've tripled it. If you review them monthly or even better weekly, you've tripled it again. If you build some plans below them and some subsystems and start to build mechanisms and things to do to build those, now you've 10 times that, where you've already tripled it and tripled it and tripled it. Now you've 10 times it, and it just goes on. And so that's what I would say is, I call it being an actor or an agent, but it's really living an intentional life. And there's there's a lot to that.
Yeah, I can't help but think of Think and Grow Rich when you say that. Kind of one of those foundational books for me that just said, if you know what you think about, you bring about. And then you explained it maybe the entire book in just a few seconds there, but that was great.
So my other list, we won't talk about them, but is love. You know, relationships are everything. At the end of the day, if you've got this big pile of stuff or these awards, it's all about relationships and accountability and personal responsibility. You know, and each of those has a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. Integrity. One thing I love, and I don't know if I made this up or if somebody, but I'm reading Speed of Trust again right now, and I just read the chapter 8 in the 8th habit, which is on, you know, the trust and being trustworthy. And the whole book of Speed of Trust is about that. But I don't think, for me, it's so much more powerful. And I always, when I talk about it, I say worthy of trust. That really, I get it, to say, versus say, are you trustworthy? It's like, are you worthy of my trust? If you're going to go to a surgeon that's going to operate on your daughter's heart, is he worthy of that trust? Or if you're going to allow someone to do whatever, are they worthy of that trust? So I love in that thing of integrity to also talk about being worthy of trust. And we could go on that all day. Mm-hmm. Another one is mental skills. So develop mental skills. And there's a whole bunch in there, including the law of attraction, the law of positive occupied space, managing your state, being optimistic, having no fear, no guilt, you know, no anxiety, really being in the present. Another great book is Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. And it just really focuses that the only real reality is now. And yet most people live their lives in the past and in the future. If, you know, they're anxious and they're always bringing the future into the present in a negative way. I talked about bringing the future into the present in a positive way through visioning, and that's kind of positive occupied space, but you can really do it in a negative way, and it's called anxiety. And you can live in the past through guilt and regret, and those don't really exist. They're things that our mind and our ego make up to keep control of us, and power is in right now. This is the moment you have to live. I'm not giving you much chance. I'll just say the last two and then you can comment.
I'm loving this. You just keep going because I'm soaking it in.
The other one is determination and will. Hard work is the number one correlate with success. I mean, it takes work. And there's attitude, having a growth mindset, being commitment, grit, ambition, drive, all that kind of stuff's in there. And then the last one is leverage. And I think that's one that I see a lot of executives don't really utilize. And I say someone said to me once, you know, if you don't have an assistant, you are one. And so I really try to, and I think stewardship delegation, I used to know the page, I think it's page 175, and the 7 habits, green and clean, I think is a great thing on stewardship delegation. And I think that's something I'm really good at, is leverage. I create a lot of leverage in my life, and that's how I've been able to run 26 businesses at once. And people say, well, how do you do that? I mean, it's really not for me that hard, because I build a system of leverage. And so I think, you know, you surround yourself with wise guides and good people and mentors and assistants and team members, and then you build systems to manage those, and you can build enormous. I mean, they really say, give me a big enough lever, I can move the world. And leverage is probably not one people would pick to be on that list, but I think is a game changer.
We might have to have a separate meeting, just you and I, if you'd be so kind, and we can talk about these in even more detail than we have in the 45 minutes today. But thanks for sharing those with us.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I want to switch gears just a little bit. I don't actually want to switch gears. I want to keep talking about what we're talking about, but I do want to talk a little bit about one of the projects that you're working on. Not everything for Ted is business, although 26 businesses at once, you would think that would be all encompassing. Ted is also really charitable minded, and he finds causes that he supports. And one of them that I just think is incredible is the Other Side Academy. Would you spend just maybe a couple of minutes telling people what it is and how it incorporates with some of these things that we've talked about today?
Yeah, and I think the story of how it came to be is a little interesting. I read a book. Everything goes back to a book. Every sentence starts with, I read a book.
That's awesome.
It's called The Influencer by Joseph Grenny. But in that book, they talk about a place in San Francisco called Delancey Street. It is a place that has basically no therapists, no guards. It doesn't take government money. It doesn't take family money. It's self-sustaining. And my gripe with all charity is that they're basically in the business of raising money, and all their, and so much of the money you spend doesn't go to the programs. It goes to the program of keeping the charity alive. And that may be a little unfair characterization, but that's kind of my view. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that was my negative view of a lot of charities. And so here's this thing I read about in this book that and it has different results. So they have game-changing results. They don't raise money or take money in. They're not living on a government thing. They're self-sustaining, and they do it themselves. And I was I think the first donor in the Utah Community Foundation, and Fraser Nelson was really just great with me in that. And so I would talk to her about things I wanted to do. And so I told her, she was the director of the Utah Community Foundation. And I told her, I'm going to bring Delancey Street to Utah. And she was like, okay, but you're crazy. And why would you want to do that? And that doesn't maybe always, isn't that simple, and it doesn't work that way. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But I get it, but I do. And I kind of just started talking about it, but I didn't do that much for a couple of years. And then one day I got an email from her and said, hey, Ted, I want to introduce you to Joseph Grenny. You guys have the same vision or goal. You have the same dream in mind. You guys should get together. And so my wife and I met with Joseph and kind of just dreamed and talked about it. And we said, are we going to do this? And let's do it. And so we decided to go to visit Delancey Street in a couple months. We then each went to our network and got support to come, and Sean Reyes from the Attorney General office supported me, and John Curtis came, who was the mayor of Provo at that time, and anybody in the criminal justice system. So what this does is it deals with alcohol and drug and crime, and so it deals with the persistent problem of recidivism, that people get stuck in a spiral, and they, 90% of all programs, they have a 10% success rate, 90% failure rate. And, you send someone into a thing for 30 days and send them out and say, good luck, or 6 months or 3 months. And that's because that's when the government funding runs out. And so they live on that. And so we thought we were going to do it at Delancey Street here. We went and toured them. And then at the end of that, we said, are we really going to do this? And we said, we were really going to do this. We're all in. We founded the Other Side Academy. And then Delancey Street cut us off and just stiff arm, just gave us nothing. And so, but that turned out to be a blessing that we just figured all this out. We've definitely replicated what was been learned before, but really what we've become is a beacon in the world in the principle of therapeutic communities. And so that was 5.5 years ago, we started that. And our statistics, again, you look at statistics of any other thing out there, and it's about a 90% failure rate. And if people stay with the Other Side Academy for 2 years, really 2 years and a day, when you come, you have to make a 2-year commitment to come. You can walk out at any time. There's no guards. There's no therapists. There's no doctors. It's each one teach one is one of our principles, and it's a self-governing group, and it's a therapeutic community. But you make a 2-year commitment, and if you stay 2 years and a day, so you stay 1 day beyond that 2 years, then you have about a 95% chance. Our data is showing after 5.5 years that even years down the road. Now we've only got 5.5 years, so I've only got people that have been out 3 years. But you will be crime-free, drug-free, employed, and housed. 95% chance of that, versus the other stuff is a 90% chance you'll be right back. You'll be being arrested. you'll be addicted to drugs, you'll be homeless. And so it's completely flipped the statistics. And it's just an amazing place. And it's all self-sufficient. It's a profitable enterprise that we still raise money at times to do a whole big new venture. We just announced the Other Side Village. That's going to be a tiny home community partnership with Salt Lake City, and to deal with homelessness. And again, people at the bottom of the bottom, and a way to give them hope and light. And when back to that leadership, that's leadership is to, and give people a path to do that. And so, yeah, the Other Side Academy is one of the most amazing things in my life. It's awesome.
You'll have to go look at it. TheOtherSideVillage.com is the new website if you want to learn more about that. Just looks incredible. It's been in the news just within the last week. And I know that the city of Salt Lake City and the county is super excited to be partners with you, Ted. And congratulations on all you're doing there and bettering the lives of people. We have a question that we always ask at the end of the podcast. We like to ask everybody what they think it means to be a gentleman. Would you like to answer that question for us today?
Yeah, and I think I probably already did. I think it's genshai. I think it's to respect the individual. And I think there is a male connotation to gentleman. I don't think a woman would like to be called a gentleman. So I think it is a gentle man and I think a lot of men aren't gentle. Or I think it has a bad connotation to have, softness. And I think the best leaders and the best people I see are very soft and yet hard. And I think that's a level 5 leader like Jim Collins talked about. They're very focused on what they want. They're very unyielding to thing, and yet they're very soft and pliable and adaptable. And kind, and really more than that, I would say it's about being kind. It's respecting the individual and seeing them. And I think genshai even captures that better, that never treat anyone or see anyone in a way that would make them feel less than, including yourself. So just be kind and see the person as a great person and their worth. And get back to leadership, your job is to see them and help them see their worth and their greatness. And it has nothing to do with what they do. It's not performance. Worth does not equal performance. It's just who they are. They're great and they're wonderful as they are, and they need to believe that, and you need to believe that.
Ted, we appreciate your time so much. I feel like I could go for another hour with you easily. So thanks for spending time with us on the Gentleman Project, and being a gentleman means a lot.
Thank you. Been great.
Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to check out Ted Broman's Other Side Academy or anything else that he's involved with, we'll do some links on social media this week and help you find those places. Thanks again, Ted. Join us next week. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you get these downloaded automatically on Monday. We're episode 31 this week, and we just want to thank all of our listeners for being with us and making us a part of your routine. We love being a part of it and love the positive feedback. And any feedback that you have for us, please email us at info@thegentlemanproject.com, and we will talk to you next week. Make it a great week.